My name is Sarah Chen. I'm 35 years old, and I've spent the last 17 years serving in the United States Navy. I hold the rank of captain, with 2 Bronze Stars and a Navy Cross hanging in a small frame above my desk. But none of that mattered to my family when they deliberately erased my name from the program of Riverside's annual military appreciation ceremony. None of it mattered when they told the event organizers that I was too busy to attend, that I wouldn't be interested in some small-town recognition. None of it mattered when they made sure I learned about the ceremony from a stranger's Facebook post, 3 days after it happened. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I stood in the parking lot of the Riverside Community Center that Thursday evening, staring at the building where my hometown had gathered to honor its veterans just 72 hours earlier. The autumn wind cut through my civilian jacket as I read the program someone had left tucked under a windshield wiper. Page after page of local heroes, servicemen, and women who had given years of their lives to protect freedoms that people like my family took for granted. My grandfather's name was there, posthumously honored 6 months after his funeral. My father had given a speech about Thomas Chen's legacy of service and sacrifice. My name was nowhere to be found. I should have been surprised, but I wasn't. This was just the latest chapter in a story that had been writing itself for decades. The story of Sarah Chen, the daughter who chose duty over dollars, honor over comfort, service over the safe path they had mapped out for me. The daughter who had somehow become the family embarrassment, simply by putting on a uniform, standing there in that empty parking lot holding a program that celebrated every veteran in our small city except me. I realized something had shifted inside me. This wasn't just about being overlooked anymore. This wasn't just about being the black sheep who never quite fit into their carefully crafted image of success. This was about something deeper, something that had been building for years like pressure behind a dam. They thought they knew who I was. They thought they could write me out of my own story, delete me from my own hometown's history, make me disappear whenever it suited their narrative. But they had no idea what was coming. They had no idea that sometimes the person you underestimate the most is the one who holds all the cards. The irony was almost beautiful. While they were busy erasing me from ceremonies and family photos, while they were explaining to neighbors why their daughter never amounted to much, I had been building something they couldn't even comprehend. A life of purpose, a career of distinction, a network of respect that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Pentagon. But more than that, I had been uncovering truths about them, about what they had done in my absence, that would soon turn their perfectly polished world upside down. I folded the program carefully and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Not as a keepsake, but as evidence. Evidence of the final insult in a lifetime of dismissal. Evidence that would soon be presented alongside bank statements, forged documents, and testimony that would shatter every lie they had built their reputation on. The Chen family restaurant empire began with my grandparents' small noodle shop on Pine Street, and by the time I was born, Golden Dragon had expanded to 3 locations across Riverside County, with my parents, Robert and Linda Chen, at the helm of what locals considered an immigrant success story. The walls of each restaurant were lined with photographs of family milestones, business achievements, and community recognition. Awards from the Chamber of Commerce, pictures with local politicians, newspaper clippings, celebrating another restaurant opening or another year of exceptional service. What those walls never showed was me. From my earliest memories, I existed in the margins of the Chen family narrative. While my younger sister Michelle posed for promotional photos in her perfectly pressed school uniforms, I was the one behind the camera, forgotten until someone needed an extra hand in the kitchen or someone to run errands between locations. While Michelle's academic achievements were framed and displayed prominently near the host station, my report cards disappeared into drawers, acknowledged with a brief nod before the conversation inevitably shifted back to business projections or Michelle's latest accomplishment. The family dynamic was established early and never questioned. Michelle was the future of Golden Dragon, the brilliant daughter who would modernize the business, expand the brand, carry forward the legacy that my grandparents had sacrificed everything to build. She spoke fluent Mandarin, understood the intricacies of restaurant management, and charmed customers with the kind of effortless grace that made my parents beam with pride. At family dinners, she would discuss menu innovations and marketing strategies while I sat quietly, picking at my food, wondering why nothing I said ever seemed to register. I tried, for years, to find my place in their vision. I worked summers in the kitchen, learning to prep vegetables and clean equipment. I studied business in high school, thinking perhaps I could contribute to the financial side of the operation. I even attempted to learn Mandarin, spending hours with language tapes while Michelle rolled her eyes at my pronunciation. But every effort was met with the same polite dismissal, the same gentle redirection towards something more suitable for my ability. The breaking point came during my senior year of high school. I had been accepted to UC San Diego with a partial academic scholarship, achievement that should have warranted at least a mention alongside Michelle's acceptance to the prestigious Culinary Institute of America. Instead, dinner that night was devoted entirely to planning Michelle's farewell party, elaborate celebration that would showcase the next generation of Chen culinary excellence to the entire business community. When I finally found the courage to mention my college acceptance, my father glanced up from his calculator where he was estimating party costs. "That's nice, Sarah," he said absently. "Will you be able to help with the restaurant while Michelle is away?" My mother nodded approvingly. "It would be good for you to learn the business from the ground up. Maybe you could manage one of the smaller locations eventually." I sat there, holding my acceptance letter, feeling something inside me crack. Not break, but crack, like ice under pressure that hasn't quite shattered yet. They saw my future as a placeholder, a warm body to fill Michelle's shoes until she returned with her degree and her vision, and her rightful place at the head of the family empire. They saw me as useful, but not valuable, present, but not important. That night I walked through downtown Riverside for hours, past the courthouse and the old mission, past the parks where I had played as a child and the shops where I had spent countless weekends, helping my parents with supply runs. The city felt smaller somehow, like a box I was rapidly outgrowing. I thought about my grandfather, Thomas Chen, who had served in Vietnam before returning to help build the restaurant business. He was the only one who ever asked me about my dreams, my plans, my thoughts on anything beyond prep schedules and inventory management. I remembered a conversation we'd had just months before his death, sitting on the back porch of his small house while my parents conducted business inside. "You're different, Sarah," he had said quietly, his weathered hands wrapped around a cup of tea. "Different isn't wrong, different is necessary." "Different from what?" I had asked. He had smiled, a sad, knowing expression that I didn't understand at the time. "Different from what different from what they can see." Standing in the parking lot of the recruitment office 3 weeks later, I finally understood what he meant. I wasn't built for the careful, controlled world of restaurant management. I wasn't designed to smile politely while customers complained about wait times, or to spend my life managing inventory spreadsheets and staff schedules. I was built for something bigger, something that required the kind of courage and commitment that my family would never understand. The Navy recruiter, Petty Officer Martinez, didn't ask me about my family's business or my sister's culinary ambitions. She asked me about my goals, my strengths, my willingness to serve something larger than myself. For the first time in my life, someone saw potential in me that had nothing to do with my usefulness to other people's dreams. When I signed the enlistment papers, I felt something I had never experienced before, the certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. The conversation with my parents that evening was exactly what I expected. My father set down his chopsticks and stared at me, as if I had announced my intention to join a circus. My mother's face went pale, then flushed with the kind of anger I had rarely seen from her. Michelle stopped mid-sentence in her description of her first semester curriculum and looked at me with genuine bewilderment. "The military?" my mother repeated, as if the words were foreign. "Sarah, you can't be serious." "It's 4 years," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe more, depending on my specialty. I want to serve my country." My father's response was swift and cutting. "You want to throw away your education. Your future. For what? To play soldier? It's not playing, I said quietly. Grandfather. He understood. Your grandfather served because he had no choice, my mother interrupted. This is America, Sarah. You have choices, you have opportunities, you have a family business waiting for you. The argument continued for hours, cycling through every possible objection. The danger, the waste of my potential, the abandonment of family obligations, the shame of a daughter choosing military service over the respectability of business ownership. Michelle contributed occasional comments about how my decision would affect her plans, how she had counted on my support during her transition back to the family business. Not once did anyone ask why I wanted to serve. Not once did anyone inquire about my motivations, my sense of purpose, my desire to be part of something that mattered beyond profit margins and customer satisfaction score. They argued against my decision as if it were a rebellion rather than a calling, a mistake rather than a choice born from deep conviction. When I left for boot camp 3 months later, only my grandfather came to see me off. He was already sick then, though none of us knew how little time he had left. He pressed a small envelope into my hands as I boarded the bus, his eyes bright with something that might have been pride. Write to me, he whispered. Tell me about the person you become. I kept that promise. For the 2 years he had left, long letters from training bases and duty stations, stories about the challenges and triumphs of military life, descriptions of the sense of belonging I had found among people who understood that service was its own reward. He wrote back faithfully, his responses filled with encouragement and questions that showed he actually listened to what I was telling him. My parents never wrote. Michelle sent exactly 2 emails in my first year of service, both asking when I planned to return to help with restaurant expansion. When I called home, conversations were brief and strained, filled with updates about business success and community recognition that seemed designed to remind me of everything I had given up. When my grandfather died during my second deployment, I requested emergency leave to attend the funeral. I flew from the Persian Gulf to LAX, then drove straight to Riverside in my dress blues, arriving just as the service was beginning. I sat in the back of St. Michael's Church, surrounded by family members who nodded politely but kept their distance, as if my uniform created an invisible barrier between us. During the eulogy, my father spoke about Thomas Chen's legacy of hard work and family devotion. He mentioned the restaurants, the community involvement, the pride my grandfather took in watching his family's American dream come to fruition. He talked about values and tradition, and the importance of honoring those who came before us. He never mentioned my grandfather's military service. He never mentioned Vietnam or the Bronze Star that hung in a small frame in my grandfather's bedroom. He never mentioned the letters my grandfather had written to me, or the pride he had expressed in my choice to serve. After the service, as I stood beside the grave, watching my grandfather's casket disappear into the California earth, Michelle approached me with what she probably thought was a conciliatory gesture. You could still come back, she said quietly. Dad's been talking about opening a 4th location. There would be a place for you. I looked at her for a long moment. This sister who had always been the favorite, the chosen one, the daughter who fit perfectly into the life my parents had designed. She genuinely believed she was offering me something valuable, something I should want. I'm already where I belong, I told her. She shook her head, the same bewildered expression I had seen the night I announced my enlistment. Sarah, you're wasting your life, playing dress-up in a uniform, following orders from people who don't even know you. What kind of future is that? I could have explained about leadership development and technical training. I could have told her about the responsibility I carried, the lives that depended on my decisions, the sense of purpose that filled every day of my service. I could have described the respect I had earned from people who judged me by my actions, rather than my family connections. Instead, I simply said, "It's my future." I flew back to my duty station the next day, carrying with me the clear understanding that my family would never see me as anything more than a disappointment, a daughter who had chosen incorrectly and stubbornly refused to correct her mistake. They would continue building their empire, celebrating their successes, and writing their family story as if I had never existed. What they didn't know was that I was building something too, something they couldn't see, couldn't understand, and couldn't control. Something that would one day force them to confront the difference between who they thought I was and who I had actually become. The crack that had formed during my senior year of high school had slowly widened over the years of dismissal and disregard. By the time I stood in that community center parking lot, holding a program that erased my existence from my hometown's military appreciation ceremony, that crack had become a chasm, and I was finally ready to let them see exactly how deep it went. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in March, 3 days after I returned from a 6-month deployment in the Mediterranean. I was sitting in my small apartment near Naval Base San Diego, surrounded by unpacked duffel bags and the peculiar emptiness that always follows extended time at sea. The morning light filtered through salt-stained windows as I sorted through months of accumulated mail, most of it, the usual collection of bills, advertisements, and official correspondence that accumulates when you're serving halfway around the world. I almost didn't answer when I saw the unfamiliar local number on my phone screen. After months of structured military communication, civilian phone calls felt intrusive, unnecessary, but something made me pick up, perhaps the instinct that comes from years of training to respond to unexpected contacts. Captain Chen, the voice was professional, cautious. This is Detective Amanda Foster with the Riverside County Sheriff's Department. I'm calling regarding some financial irregularities that have come to our attention, involving your personal accounts. The words hit me like cold water. Financial irregularity. I set down the stack of mail I had been sorting and walked to the window, looking out at the Pacific Ocean that had been my home for the past half year. What kind of irregularities, ma'am? I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Would you be available to meet this afternoon? I can drive down to San Diego, or if you prefer, we could meet at our office in Riverside. The drive to Riverside took 2 hours through familiar California landscape that felt foreign after months of Mediterranean waters and foreign ports. I kept the radio off, my mind cycling through possibilities, trying to understand what financial irregularities could possibly involve me. My banking was simple, automated, military pay, deposited monthly, automatic payments for rent and utilities, minimal personal spending. I lived below my means, saved consistently, and hadn't touched my accounts in months beyond basic necessity. Detective Foster met me at a small coffee shop downtown, a place I didn't recognize despite having grown up just blocks away. She was younger than I expected, with the kind of direct manner that suggested she had delivered difficult news before. She spread a thin manila folder on the table between us, her expression carefully neutral. Captain Chen, when did you last check your personal banking account? Before deployment, I answered honestly. 6 months ago, maybe 7. I have automatic payments set up for everything. My pay gets deposited, my bills get paid. I don't really need to monitor it actively. She nodded as if this confirmed something she already suspected. What I'm about to show you may be disturbing. Over the past 18 months, there have been systematic withdrawals from your savings accounts, your investment portfolio, and what appears to be early withdrawal from your military retirement fund. The folder opened to reveal pages of bank statements I had never seen, account activities that bore my name, but not my authorization, transaction after transaction, thousands of dollars at a time, transferred to accounts I didn't recognize. My savings account, which should have contained nearly $40,000, showed a balance of $837. I stared at the numbers, feeling a strange disconnection from reality. This isn't possible. I don't understand how. The transfers were authorized using what appears to be valid documentation, power of attorney forms, signed authorization letters, even what looks like military deployment paperwork justifying the financial management. Detective Foster pulled out another set of documents. Do you recognize this signature? The signature was mine, perfect in every detail, down to the distinctive way I crossed my T's, and the slight upturn at the end of my last name. But I had never written these documents, never authorized these transfers, never given anyone permission to access my accounts while I was deployed. Someone has been forging your signature with remarkable accuracy, Detective Foster continued. The financial institutions accepted the documentation because it appeared legitimate. The person, or persons involved clearly had access to samples of your real signature and intimate knowledge of your deployment schedule. The reality began to settle in my stomach like lead. How much? Total, just over $230,000. The transfers have been ongoing for 18 months, always timed to coincide with your deployments when you wouldn't be monitoring your accounts regularly. I sat back in the coffee shop chair, watching steam rise from my untouched cup of coffee, trying to process the magnitude of what I was hearing. $230,000. Years of careful saving, military pay accumulated over a decade and a half of service, retirement funds that were supposed to secure my future after the Navy, gone. Do you have any idea who might have had access to your personal information? Family members, close friends, anyone who might know your deployment schedule and have samples of your signature? The question hung in the air between us like smoke. I thought about the forms I had signed over the years, emergency contact information, family notifications for deployment communication. I thought about my parents' house, where mail occasionally still arrived addressed to me, where my old room contained boxes of personal documents I had never bothered to retrieve. I thought about family dinners where my service was discussed like an inconvenience, where my deployments were mentioned as obstacles to holiday planning and family gatherings. Detective, I said slowly, I need to see where this money went. She turned to another section of the folder, revealing account numbers and beneficiary information that made my blood run cold. Golden Dragon Restaurant Group, Chen Family Holdings LLC, Michelle Chen Personal Investment Account, Robert and Linda Chen Joint Saving. The money had been systematically funneled into my family's business accounts, personal savings, and investment portfolios. We've been investigating this for 3 weeks, Detective Foster explained. The case came to our attention when your bank's fraud detection software flagged the unusual pattern of large withdrawals during deployment period. When we started tracking the destination accounts, we found they all led back to businesses and individuals sharing your last name and address history. I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest, different from the shock of financial loss. This was betrayal at a molecular level, the kind of violation that changes the basic structure of how you understand the world. Not strangers, not hackers, not random criminals. Family, the people who had raised me, fed me, shared 20 years of birthdays and holidays, and ordinary Tuesday dinner. What kind of documentation did they use? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Detective Foster produced another stack of papers, letters of attorney supposedly signed by me, authorizing my parents to manage my financial affairs during military deployment, investment authorization forms, allegedly granting my sister access to my retirement accounts for family emergency purposes, even medical power of attorney documents claiming I had granted them authority to make financial decisions if I was injured or killed in the line of duty. Every document was perfectly executed, bearing signatures that matched my handwriting with forensic precision. The dates corresponded exactly with my deployment schedules, the language was professional and legally sound, and the documentation package was comprehensive enough to satisfy any reasonable financial institution.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Captain Chen, Detective Foster said gently, this level of sophistication suggests the perpetrators had intimate knowledge of your life, your career, and your financial situation. They knew exactly when you would be unreachable, exactly what documentation would be required, and exactly how to replicate your authorization. I studied the forged signatures, tracing the familiar lines with my fingertip. Someone had practiced these signatures extensively, spent hours perfecting the subtle details that made them indistinguishable from my actual handwriting. Someone had researched military deployment procedures, financial regulations, power of attorney requirements. Someone had invested significant time and effort into stealing my life savings with methodical precision. What's the timeline for recovery? I asked. Detective Foster's expression grew more cautious. That's complicated, because the perpetrators are family members, and because the documentation appears legitimate on its surface. This becomes a civil matter as much as a criminal one. The banks were acting in good faith, based on what appeared to be valid authorization. Your family will claim they were acting with your knowledge and consent. But I never gave consent. I never signed these documents. I believe you, But proving that in court, while the perpetrators have access to family resources, legal representation, and 18 months of carefully constructed documentation will be challenging. They've had time to build a narrative. I closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. What do you need from me? First, we need you to file a formal complaint. Then we'll need comprehensive documentation of your actual signatures, your deployment records, and any communication, or lack thereof, with your family regarding financial matters. We'll also need you to be prepared for the possibility that this case may take months or years to resolve. The drive back to San Diego was different from the drive up. The familiar landscape now carried the weight of betrayal. Every mile a reminder of the distance between who I thought my family was and who they had revealed themselves to be. I thought about Christmas cards they had sent to my various duty stations, cheerful updates about restaurant expansion and business success. I thought about the casual mentions of new locations, equipment upgrades, investment opportunities that had apparently been funded with money stolen from my military service. I thought about my grandfather's funeral, where my father had spoken about family values and honoring those who came before us, while wearing a suit probably purchased with money taken from my account. I thought about Michelle's social media posts, showcasing her culinary school education and restaurant management training, achievements apparently subsidized by theft from her sister's savings. That night I sat in my apartment with a legal pad and began making deployment dates, communication records, copies of actual documents I had signed over the years, bank statements going back 5 years, showing the pattern of deposits and legitimate withdrawals before the systematic theft began. Contact information for military personnel who could verify my whereabouts during key periods when the forged documents were allegedly signed. The work was methodical, detailed, the kind of careful documentation that military service teaches you to maintain instinctively. But as I wrote, something else was building inside me, not just anger at the theft, not just betrayal at the deception, but a crystalline clarity about who these people really were. For 15 years I had carried a quiet hurt about their dismissal of my service, their inability to understand my choice, their treatment of my military career as an embarrassing phase I would eventually outgrow. I had told myself they loved me but didn't understand me. I had made excuses for their absence from ceremonies, their lack of interest in my achievements, their failure to acknowledge my service. Now I understood. It wasn't misunderstanding. It wasn't different values, or generational gaps, or cultural differences about military service. It was something much simpler and much more devastating. They saw me as a resource to be exploited, not a person to be respected. They saw my service as an opportunity for them, not an achievement of mine. They saw my absence during deployments as convenient access to my financial accounts, not sacrifice for my country. The girl who had sat quietly at family dinners, who had tried so hard to find her place in their vision of success, who had spent years wondering why she never felt seen or valued by the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally, finally had her answer. They had seen her perfectly clearly. They had simply decided she was useful but not important, present but not valuable, family when it served their purposes, stranger when it didn't. I finished my documentation at 3 in the morning, pages of careful notes that would form the foundation of both criminal charges and civil litigation. As I organized the papers into neat stacks, I felt something settling into place inside me. Not peace, not closure, but purpose. They had spent 18 months systematically stealing from me while I served my country. They had used my deployments, my dedication to duty, my commitment to something larger than myself, as opportunities to betray me in the most fundamental way possible. Now it was my turn to show them what systematic precision really looked like. They had underestimated me for 35 years, dismissed my intelligence, my capabilities, my strength. They were about to discover that the daughter they had written off as a disappointment had learned a few things about strategy, planning, and execution during her years of service. The war they had started with forged signatures and stolen savings was about to become very real. And this time, I wasn't fighting alone. The law office of Marcus Thompson, occupied the 15th floor of a glass tower in downtown San Diego, with views of the harbor that reminded me why I had chosen this city as my shore duty assignment. Thompson came recommended by the Navy's Legal Assistance Office, a former military attorney who specialized in complex financial crimes and had a reputation for methodical preparation that impressed even experienced JAG officers. He was nothing like the lawyers I had imagined from television dramas. No expensive suit or dramatic gestures, just a compact man in his 50s with careful eyes and the kind of systematic approach to problems that I recognized from military planning sessions. When I laid out the documents Detective Foster had shown me, he spent 40 minutes reading through everything twice before speaking. "Captain Chen," he said finally, "this is sophisticated financial fraud. The level of planning, the quality of the forged documents, the timing coordinated with your deployment schedule, this required significant preparation and intimate knowledge of your personal life. How long will it take to recover the money?" Thompson leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in a gesture that suggested he was about to deliver unwelcome news. "That depends on several factors. How quickly we can prove the documents are forged, how much of the money still exists in recoverable form, and how aggressively your family fights the charges." "What do you mean, how much still exists?" He pulled out a yellow legal pad and began sketching what looked like a flowchart. "Your family has had 18 months to spend, invest, or hide this money. The transfers went into business accounts for their restaurants, personal investment portfolios, real estate purchases, and other assets. Some of it may have been converted into forms that are difficult to recover quickly." I studied the chart he was drawing, arrows connecting boxes labeled with account numbers and business entities. "You're telling me they might have already spent my retirement fund on restaurant equipment?" "I'm telling you that financial crimes like this often involve rapid conversion of stolen assets into hard-to-trace forms. New business investments, real estate, luxury purchases that can be claimed as legitimate business expenses." He looked up from his note. "How much do you know about your family's recent financial activities?" The question hit me oddly. I realized I knew almost nothing about their business operations, beyond the basic fact that they owned multiple restaurants. During my rare phone calls home, conversations focused on my deployments, my lack of communication, my failure to visit during holidays. Business discussions were held around me, not with me, as if my presence was tolerated but my input unwelcome. "I know they've expanded," I said slowly. "New locations, renovations. My sister Michelle posts photos on social media sometimes." Thompson made a note on his pad. "We'll need to subpoena their business records, personal financial statements, and tax returns for the past 2 years. If they've been using your money to fund expansion, there should be a clear trail." "What about criminal charges?" Detective Foster is building a case, but criminal prosecution and civil recovery are separate processes. The criminal case focuses on proving they committed fraud. The civil case focuses on getting your money back. Both are important, but they move on different timelines. I spent the next hour providing Thompson with every detail I could remember about my family's access to my personal information, their knowledge of my deployment schedules, and their recent lifestyle changes. He took notes in careful handwriting, occasionally asking clarifying questions that revealed how thoroughly he understood the scope of the crime. "Captain, I need to ask you about something that might be uncomfortable," Thompson said as our meeting neared its end. "During this process, your family will likely claim that you gave them permission to access your accounts. They'll say you asked them to manage your finances while you were deployed, that you were grateful for their help, that this is all a misunderstanding. But I believe, but they've had 18 months to construct a narrative, and they clearly have the sophistication to create convincing documentation. They may have fake emails, recorded phone calls, or witnesses who will claim you discussed this arrangement with them." The possibility hadn't occurred to me, and it felt like another violation. Not only had they stolen my money, but they were prepared to lie about my character, my judgment, my basic competence in managing my own affairs. "What do we do about that?" Thompson smiled for the first time during our meeting, a thin expression that suggested he had dealt with similar situations before. We do what military personnel do best: we prepare thoroughly, we document everything, and we let the facts speak for themselves. Over the next 3 weeks, I threw myself into case preparation with the same intensity I brought to military operations. Thompson connected me with Elena Vasquez, a forensic accountant who specialized in tracing complex financial fraud. Together, we built a comprehensive picture of what had happened to my money and where it had gone. Elena worked from a small office near the airport, surrounded by multiple computer monitors and stacks of financial documents that she organized with scientific precision. She spoke in numbers and percentages, translating the emotional impact of theft into cold mathematical reality. "Your family has been very busy," she said during our second meeting, pulling up spreadsheets that mapped money flows like military logistics charts. "The stolen funds have been used to purchase new restaurant equipment worth $87,000, fund renovations at 2 locations totaling $112,000, and make down payments on commercial real estate valued at nearly $500,000. I stared at the numbers on her screen, feeling a strange detachment from the magnitude of what I was seeing. They used my military savings to buy buildings, not just buildings. They've created what appears to be a coordinated business expansion, funded entirely by money taken from your accounts: new equipment, property acquisitions, inventory purchases, even staff training programs." Elena clicked through screens showing purchase orders, loan applications, and business permits. "This wasn't opportunistic theft. This was systematic conversion of your personal savings into business assets. Can we recover it?" "Some of it. The equipment can be liquidated, though probably not at full value. The real estate investments are more complicated because they've already appreciated in value and may have legitimate business loans attached. The renovation costs are essentially gone, unless we can force them to sell the improved properties." Elena's analysis revealed something even more disturbing than the theft itself. My family hadn't just stolen my money, they had used it to build wealth for themselves while I served overseas. Every month I spent on deployment, risking my life in service to my country, they were at home using my sacrifice to fund their prosperity. The restaurant expansion I had heard about in casual phone calls, the business success my mother mentioned with pride, the new opportunities Michelle posted about on social media, all of it had been subsidized by money taken from my military service. "Elena," I said quietly, "I need you to show me something specific. Can you track exactly when each theft occurred and match it to my deployment schedule?" She pulled up a new screen, showing a timeline that made my stomach tighten. Every major withdrawal coincided exactly with my departure for overseas assignments. The pattern was precise, systematic, and utterly damning. They hadn't just known my deployment schedule, they had used it as a timetable for theft. "Captain Chen," Elena said gently, "this level of coordination suggests they planned this fraud from the beginning. These weren't crimes of opportunity, they were waiting for you to leave so they could access your account." I thought about the phone calls home, the brief conversations where they asked about my deployment schedule with what I had interpreted as family concern. I thought about the emergency contact forms I had dutifully updated, listing my parents as primary contacts for financial and medical emergency. I thought about the trust I had extended without question, the assumption that family meant safety, that blood created bonds stronger than self-interest. How long would it take someone to learn to forge signatures this accurately? I asked. Elena considered the question seriously. "Given the quality of the forgeries, probably months of practice. Someone would need multiple samples of your real signature and significant time to develop the muscle memory for consistent reproduction." The timeline suggested they had been planning this fraud for over a year before they started stealing. While I was serving my country, they were at home practicing my signature, researching financial regulations, and preparing to systematically betray me. "What's our strongest evidence?" I asked. "The deployment correlation," Elena answered immediately. "The fact that every major theft coincided with your overseas service creates a pattern that's almost impossible to explain as legitimate financial management. No reasonable financial advisor would make large withdrawals only when their client is unreachable in combat zones." Thompson agreed when we presented Elena's analysis during our next strategy session. The deployment pattern is devastating evidence against any claim of legitimate authorization. Combine that with the forged signatures and the fact that you never received any notification of these transactions, and we have a strong case. What about their likely defense? They'll claim you gave them general authorization to manage your finances during deployment. They'll say you were too busy with military duties to handle personal financial matters. They may even claim you asked them to invest your money in the family business as a form of emergency safekeeping. The strategy session lasted 3 hours, covering every possible angle of legal attack and defense. Thompson explained the discovery process, the timeline for civil litigation, and the coordination required with Detective Foster's criminal investigation. Elena outlined the asset recovery possibilities and the challenges of liquidating business investments that had been purchased with stolen funds. As we concluded the meeting, Thompson asked a question that had been weighing on my mind since this nightmare began. "Captain, have you had any contact with your family since discovering the theft?" "No, I've been avoiding them while we build the case. That's probably wise. Once we file formal charges, they'll know you've discovered what they've done. They may try to contact you directly, perhaps offering partial restitution in exchange for dropping the charges. And if they do," Thompson's expression was serious, "don't agree to anything without consulting me first. Don't sign anything, don't accept any money, and don't make any statements about forgiveness or understanding. Everything you say from this point forward could be used against you in court." The advice felt military in its clarity and precision. Trust no one, verify everything, maintain operational security until the mission is complete. Driving back to my apartment that evening, I realized that the girl who had sat quietly at family dinners, who had tried so hard to earn their approval, who had spent years wondering why she never felt valued by the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally, was completely gone. In her place was a naval officer who understood strategy, who recognized the importance of intelligence gathering, who knew how to plan complex operations and execute them with precision. The family who had dismissed me as a disappointment was about to discover that their quiet, overlooked daughter had learned a few things about warfare during her 15 years of service. They had chosen the wrong person to steal from. They had underestimated the wrong daughter. They had betrayed someone who knew exactly how to fight back. The preliminary paperwork was filed on a Friday afternoon in late April. Criminal charges for financial fraud, civil suits for asset recovery, and restraining orders preventing further access to accounts or disposal of assets purchased with stolen funds. Detective Foster coordinated with Thompson to ensure the criminal and civil cases supported rather than contradicted each other. "Captain Chen," Thompson said as we left the courthouse, "once these documents are served, your family will know you're serious about recovery. They may try to negotiate, threaten, or manipulate you into dropping the charges." "What should I expect?" "Everything," he said simply. "Tears, anger, family loyalty arguments, threats of public embarrassment, claims that you're destroying the family business and putting innocent employees out of work. They may even claim they were planning to pay you back with interest." I thought about the program from the military appreciation ceremony, still folded in my jacket pocket, the ceremony where they had erased my name, while using my stolen money to fund their business expansion. The event where my father had given speeches about supporting local veterans, while systematically robbing his veteran daughter. "Thompson," I said, "they've been stealing from me for 18 months while I served overseas. They've been erasing me from family events and community recognition while using my sacrifice to build their wealth. Whatever they say, whatever arguments they make, whatever manipulation they attempt, just remember that." He nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the mindset we need for this fight." The documents would be served Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, the family who had spent my entire life treating me as an afterthought would discover that their dismissed daughter had grown into someone they should have been afraid to cross. The war was about to begin in earnest, and this time, I held all the strategic advantages. The call came from my mother at 6:37 in the morning, exactly 14 hours after the legal documents had been served. I was already awake, sitting on my balcony with coffee and the sunrise, when my phone started buzzing with her contact information. I let it ring through to voicemail, then listened to her message with the detached curiosity of someone observing a tactical situation unfold. Her voice was different than I remembered, smaller, somehow
strained. Sarah, please call me back. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. We need to talk before this gets out of hand. Please, honey, call me. 3 more calls came before 7 a.m. My father twice, his messages clipped and angry, demanding I contact him immediately to straighten this mess out. Then Michelle, her voice carrying the edge of panic, talking rapidly about family loyalty and how we needed to work together to fix this situation. I deleted all the messages without returning the calls. At 8:15, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a woman's voice identified herself as Catherine Walsh, attorney for the Chen family. She spoke with the kind of professional courtesy that barely concealed underlying hostility. Captain Chen, I represent your parents and sister in this unfortunate matter. I believe there's been a significant misunderstanding that we could resolve quickly if you're willing to have a conversation. Ms. Walsh, I said calmly, you can direct all communication through my attorney Marcus Thompson. I'm sure you have his contact information from the documents you received yesterday. Captain, surely we don't need to involve more lawyers in what should be a family matter. Your parents are devastated by these accusations. They feel there's been a breakdown in communication that's led to this confusion. The word confusion struck me as particularly interesting. Not theft, not fraud, not systematic financial betrayal. Confusion. Ms. Walsh, there's no confusion. $230,000 was stolen from my accounts using forged documents while I was serving overseas.
The money was used to fund business expansion for my family's restaurants. These are facts, not misunderstandings. There was a pause before she responded, and I could hear the careful recalibration in her voice. Captain, your family maintains that you gave them permission to manage your finances during your deployments. They have documentation supporting this arrangement. Then I'm sure they'll have no trouble presenting that documentation in court. Good day, Miss Walsh. I hung up and immediately called Marcus Thompson to report the contact. He listened without interruption, then made a note in what I assumed was my case file. Predictable, he said. They're testing to see if you'll negotiate privately before the criminal case gains momentum. The fact that they hired an attorney within 14 hours tells us they're taking this seriously. What happens next? We wait. They'll spend the next few days trying to figure out how much evidence we actually have. Then they'll either come back with a settlement offer, or they'll dig in for a prolonged fight. I didn't have to wait long for an answer. 2 days later, Catherine Walsh called Thompson with what she described as a generous settlement proposal that would avoid the need for destructive litigation that serves no one's interests. The offer was presented to me in Thompson's office on a Thursday afternoon. Walsh proposed that my family would return $150,000 in exchange for my agreement to drop all criminal and civil charges. They would characterize the payment as family financial assistance that had been misunderstood due to poor communication during Sarah's military deployment. They're offering to return 2/3 of what they stole, Thompson explained, in exchange for you allowing them to keep 1/3 and admitting no wrongdoing. I stared at the settlement proposal, written on Walsh's law firm letterhead with language that made the theft sound like a bookkeeping error. What would happen if I accepted this? You'd get most of your money back relatively quickly. The criminal charges would disappear. Your family would avoid prosecution and public embarrassment. The whole matter would be sealed under confidentiality agreements, and they would keep $80,000 of my money as payment for committing fraud against me. Thompson nodded. That's essentially what they're proposing. I thought about the military appreciation ceremony program, still in my desk drawer at home. The event where they had honored every veteran in Riverside except the one whose stolen money had helped fund their recent business success. I thought about 18 months of systematic theft timed precisely to my overseas deployments. I thought about forged signatures practiced over months of careful preparation. Thompson, what are the chances we recover everything if we go to trial? Honestly, maybe 70%. There are always risks in litigation. They might have spent or hidden assets we can't trace. The criminal case might not result in conviction if they present convincing fake evidence of your authorization. Going to trial means months or years of uncertainty. And what are the chances they get away with keeping my money if I accept this settlement? 100%. The choice was clear: accept partial justice and certain recovery, or fight for complete vindication with the risk of getting nothing. I thought about the values the Navy had taught me, the importance of accountability, the principle that actions have consequences. Reject the offer, I said. If they want to avoid trial, they can return every dollar they stole plus interest, admit guilt publicly, and submit to whatever criminal penalties the court deems appropriate. Thompson smiled slightly. I'll convey your counter-proposal to Ms. Walsh. The response came within hours. Walsh called Thompson to say that my demands were unreasonable and vindictive, and that my family was prepared to defend themselves against these baseless accusations. Walsh is clearly confident they have evidence we don't know about. They may have fabricated a more comprehensive cover story than we anticipated. The next phase began immediate discovery requests, depositions, document subpoenas, and evidence collection that would determine whether my family's theft could be proven beyond reasonable doubt. Thompson and Elena Vasquez worked with Detective Foster to coordinate the criminal and civil investigations, ensuring that evidence from one case supported the other. The first major breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Elena had subpoenaed my family's business banking records as part of tracing the stolen funds, and buried in 18 months of commercial transactions, she found something that demolished their entire defense strategy. Captain Chen, she said during our meeting the following week, your family made a critical mistake. They documented their own crime. She pulled up bank records on her computer screen, highlighting a series of entries that initially looked routine. Internal memos between my parents, Michelle, and their business accountant, discussing what they called Sarah's deployment fund and military savings transfer. They were treating your stolen money as a business asset, Elena explained. They tracked it separately from their other restaurant income, calculated interest and returns on investments made with your funds, and even discussed repayment schedules in their internal correspondence. The documents were devastating. Email exchanges between my parents and Michelle, discussing how much of my money they could borrow during each deployment without attracting attention. Spreadsheets calculating returns on investments made with stolen funds. Business memos referring to Sarah's military savings, as if it were a loan rather than theft. Most damning of all was a message from Michelle to their accountant, sent just 3 months earlier. Make sure the military money stays in separate track. We need to be able to show repayment capability if Sarah ever asks questions. They knew it was theft, I said, staring at the computer screen. They were planning how to cover it up from the beginning. Elena nodded. These documents prove criminal intent and destroy any claim that they believed they had authorization. You don't plan cover stories for legitimate financial transactions. Thompson was equally pleased when Elena presented the evidence to him. This changes everything. They can't claim misunderstanding when they were explicitly discussing concealment strategies. But the most significant development came from Detective Foster's investigation into the forged signature. The sheriff's department had sent the fraudulent documents to the state crime lab for handwriting analysis, and the results provided scientific proof of what we already knew. The signatures are definitely forgeries, Detective Foster explained during our meeting at the sheriff's office. But more importantly, the lab was able to identify the source material used to create them. She showed me a forensic report that read like something from a television crime drama. Microscopic analysis of the forged signatures revealed that they had been created by someone tracing over photocopies of my real signatures, using a specific type of pen that left chemical residue detectable under laboratory examination. The forger used signatures from documents you signed for emergency contact purposes, military family notification forms, and power of attorney documents related to your grandfather's estate. Detective Foster continued. We found the source documents in your parents' house when we executed the search warrant yesterday. The search warrant. I hadn't known they were planning to search my family's home, and the news hit me with unexpected emotional impact. I imagined police officers walking through the house where I had grown up, searching through family documents and personal papers, treating my childhood home as a crime scene. What did you find? Detective Foster opened a thick folder containing photographs and evidence inventory. Practice sheets with your signature repeated dozens of times. Photocopies of legitimate documents bearing your real signature. Research notes about military deployment procedures and financial power of attorney requirements. And correspondence with their attorney that predates the fraud by several months. The photographs showed my father's desk drawer,
opened to reveal pages of practice signatures in his handwriting, gradually becoming more accurate reproductions of my actual signature. There were notes in Michelle's handwriting about military banking procedures and deployment notification systems. There were printed emails between my parents discussing my upcoming deployments and optimal timing for financial transfer. Captain Chen, Detective Foster said gently, "This was a carefully planned, long-term fraud operation. Your family spent months preparing to steal from you systematically. The evidence was overwhelming. Forged documents, falsified authorization forms, systematic theft coordinated with my deployment schedule, and clear documentation of criminal intent." Thompson estimated that the criminal case against my family now had better than 90% likelihood of conviction. "They're going to prison," he said matter-of-factly. "The question now is how long, and whether they'll plea bargain or force us to trial." But I was thinking about something beyond legal consequence. For 35 years I had carried the quiet hurt of being undervalued by my family, dismissed as the daughter who had made the wrong choices, treated as an afterthought in their pursuit of business success. I had told myself they loved me but didn't understand me. I had made excuses for their absence from military ceremonies, their lack of interest in my achievements, their failure to acknowledge my service. Now I understood the truth. It wasn't misunderstanding or different values or generational conflict. It was cold, calculated exploitation. They saw my military service not as sacrifice for my country, but as opportunity for them. They saw my deployments not as dangerous duty assignments, but as convenient windows for theft. They saw me not as a daughter deserving respect, but as a resource to be systematically drained. The realization should have devastated me, but instead it brought a strange clarity. The girl who had spent years wondering why she never felt seen or valued by her family finally had her answer. They had seen her perfectly clearly. They had simply decided she was useful for theft. Thompson interrupted my thoughts with a question that brought me back to the present moment. "Captain, there's something else you should know. Your family has been contacting members of the Riverside community, telling people that you've had a mental breakdown related to military service, and that you're making false accusations against them." The information hit me like a physical blow. "What kind of contact?" "Restaurant customers, business associates, community leaders. They're claiming that combat stress has made you paranoid and vindictive, that you're trying to destroy their business out of jealousy and mental instability." I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. Not only were they thieves, but they were attempting to destroy my reputation and credibility as a veteran. They were using the very service they had exploited as evidence of my supposed mental unfitness. "Thompson," I said quietly, "I want them destroyed. Legally, financially, and publicly. I want everyone in Riverside to know exactly what they did, and who they really are." He nodded approvingly. "I was hoping you'd say that, because I have an idea that might accomplish all three objectives simultaneously." Thompson's idea was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of waiting for trial, we would hold a press conference, presenting the evidence against my family. We would invite local media, business leaders, and community members to see the documented proof of their systematic fraud against a deployed military service member. "The evidence is so overwhelming that presenting it publicly will destroy their credibility before they can spread more lies about your mental state," Thompson explained. "When people see the forged signatures, the stolen funds, and the planning documents, they'll understand exactly who the real criminals are. Won't that prejudice potential jurors if we go to trial? At this point, I don't think we'll need a trial. Once this evidence becomes public, they'll have no choice but to plea bargain. No jury in California is going to side with people who systematically stole from a deployed Navy officer." Detective Foster agreed to participate in the press conference, presenting the criminal evidence that proved systematic fraud. Elena would explain the financial analysis showing how my stolen funds had been used to build their business empire. Thompson would outline the civil case for complete asset recovery, plus damages. "When do we do this?" I asked. Thompson checked his calendar. 2 weeks from today. That gives us time to prepare comprehensive presentations and ensures maximum media coverage." "And what do I say?" "You tell your story. You explain how your family systematically betrayed you while you served overseas. You let people see who you really are, versus who they've been claiming you are." I thought about the military appreciation ceremony, the program that had honored every veteran in Riverside except me, while my family used my stolen money to fund their business expansion. I thought about standing in that empty parking lot, holding evidence of my own erasure, wondering how my family could be so blind to my service and sacrifice. Now I understood they hadn't been blind at all. They had seen my service perfectly clearly, and they had used it against me. The press conference was scheduled for Thursday afternoon at the Riverside Community Center, the same building where they had honored local veterans, while deliberately excluding the daughter whose money had helped fund their recent business success. 2 weeks from today, in the same room where my father had given speeches about supporting local heroes, the community would learn the truth about the Chen family's patriotism and integrity. 2 weeks from today, the family who had spent my entire life treating me as an afterthought would discover that their quiet, dismissed daughter had grown into someone they should have been afraid to cross. The war was entering its final phase, and I held every strategic advantage they had been too arrogant to recognize. The press conference was scheduled for 2 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, but by noon, the parking lot of the Riverside Community Center was already filling with cars. Local news vans lined the street, their satellite dishes extended like mechanical flowers reaching toward the sky. I watched from my rental car parked across the street, as reporters and camera crews set up equipment in the same building where my family had celebrated local veterans, while deliberately erasing my name from recognition. At 1:55 I walked through the main entrance wearing my dress blue uniform, every ribbon and medal positioned with regulation precision. The weight of the fabric felt different than it had during routine ceremony. Today, it represented not just my service, but vindication for every deployment they had used as an opportunity to steal from me. The community center's main hall was packed beyond capacity. Local business owners, restaurant customers, community leaders and military families filled every seat. I recognized faces from my childhood, neighbors who had watched me grow up, people who had known my family for decades. Marcus Thompson approached the podium first, his presentation methodical and devastating. He displayed enlarged photographs of the forged signatures, bank records showing systematic theft, and internal family communications that proved criminal intent. The room remained silent as he explained how my parents and sister had spent months planning their fraud, timing their thefts to coincide exactly with my overseas deployments. Detective Foster followed with criminal evidence that made several audience members gasp audibly. Practice sheets with my father's attempts to perfect my signature, research notes about military banking procedures, email exchanges discussing optimal timing for financial transfers while I served in combat zone. Elena Vasquez presented the financial analysis with scientific precision, showing how $230,000 of my military savings had been converted into restaurant equipment, property investments, and business expansion. She displayed spreadsheets my family had maintained, tracking what they internally called Sarah's deployment fund, as if my stolen money were a business asset. When my turn came to speak, I approached the podium with the same calm I brought to military briefing. The room was absolutely silent. Every face turned toward me with expressions ranging from shock to anger to sympathy. "My name is Captain Sarah Chen," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the hall. "For 15 years I've served my country in the United States Navy. I've been deployed to combat zones, led missions in dangerous waters, and taken an oath to defend the freedoms we all enjoy." I paused, looking out at the audience that included my parents' customers, business partners and community associates. While I was serving overseas, risking my life for my country, my family systematically stole my military savings. They used my deployments as opportunities for theft. They converted my sacrifice into their profit. The silence in the room was profound. I could see my parents' business associates shifting uncomfortably, processing the evidence they had just witnessed. 2 weeks ago, you might have seen my family at community events, heard them speak about supporting local veterans, watched them present themselves as pillars of this community. Today, you've seen the truth. They don't support veterans, they exploit them. I concluded my remarks and returned to my seat, watching as the press conference's impact rippled through the audience. Reporters shouted questions about criminal charges and asset recovery. Community members who had known my family for decades stared at the evidence displays with expressions of disbelief and disgust. Within hours, the story dominated local news coverage. Video clips of the evidence presentation circulated on social media, accompanied by commentary about military families and veteran support. The contrast between my family's public image and their documented crimes became a symbol of hypocrisy that resonated far beyond Riverside. By evening, all 3 Golden Dragon restaurant locations had closed temporarily, their parking lots empty of the cars that usually filled them during dinner hours. My family's attorney released a statement, claiming they were considering their legal options, but the evidence presented at the press conference made their position indefensible. The criminal plea negotiations began within a week. Faced with overwhelming evidence and public exposure, my family accepted responsibility for systematic fraud against a deployed service member. My father received 18 months in federal prison, my mother 12 months, and Michelle received probation with community service, specifically focused on veteran support organizations. The civil settlement required full restitution of stolen funds, plus interest, liquidation of assets purchased with my money, and payment of all legal expenses. The Golden Dragon restaurant empire that had been built partially with my stolen savings was sold to cover their debt. But the most meaningful outcome wasn't financial or legal. 3 months after the press conference, I used a portion of the recovered funds to establish the Harbor Light Cafe, a veterans support center in downtown Riverside. The facility provides job training, counseling services, and community connections for military families transitioning to civilian life. The center operates in a renovated building 2 blocks from where the Golden Dragon restaurants once stood. Its walls display photographs of local veterans, military service recognition, and community achievement awards. Unlike my family's establishments, these walls tell stories of honor, service, and genuine respect for those who have served. On quiet mornings, I sometimes walk through the Harbor Light Cafe, watching veterans share coffee and conversation, seeing the community support that should exist for all military families. The irony isn't lost on me that my family's betrayal ultimately led to something more valuable than the money they stole. It led to purpose, community, and the kind of respect that can't be faked or stolen. 6 months after the press conference, I received a letter from my father written from federal prison. It contained no excuses, no justifications, just a simple acknowledgement that he had been wrong about everything. He wrote that he finally understood what my service meant, what he had taken from me, and what kind of person I had become despite their treatment. I read the letter once, then filed it away. Some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness, but healing doesn't always require reconciliation. Sometimes it requires building something better from the wreckage they left behind. Today, when I drive through Riverside, I see the Harbor Light Cafe's sign glowing warmly in the evening light, welcoming veterans and their families to a place where their service is genuinely honored. I see a community that learned the difference between those who support veterans and those who exploit them. I built that difference, one conversation, one program, one veteran at a time. The family who thought I was useless discovered that the daughter they dismissed had created something they never could have imagined. Something that mattered, something that lasted, something that honored the uniform they had never bothered to understand. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.